Some doors are never meant to be opened. This is the story of 20 forbidden historical sites, sealed away from the world for centuries. By the end of this journey, you will understand the true power of secrets and what happens when they are finally revealed. We will explore an emperor's tomb designed with rivers of poison and a modern Arctic vault protecting the future of humanity. Why would a civilization choose to bury its own history? And what do we risk when we uncover it? What does our fascination with these locked doors say about us? The quest for eternity began with a single man's ambition. In the heart of ancient China, the first emperor to unite its warring states, Qin Shi Huang, commanded a final project that would dwarf all others. His tomb was not merely a resting place, it was an entire subterranean kingdom, a mirror of his celestial rule, sealed forever upon his passing in the year 210 before the Common Era. For over 2,000 years, its central chamber has remained inviolate, guarded by more than just earth and stone. Ancient historians wrote of rivers and seas of shimmering, liquid mercury, replicating the great waters of his realm, and of ingenious mechanical traps designed to unleash a deadly defense against any intruder. This created a seal not just physical but psychological, weaving fear and superstition into a perfect barrier for centuries. The discovery in 1974 of the now famous Terracotta Army, that silent legion of thousands of unique clay soldiers, was a revelation that shook the world. Yet, archaeologists like Duan Qingbo remind us this staggering find is merely the outer perimeter, the guardians of the gate. They stand in silent formation, facing east, protecting a central mound that has never been opened. The technological challenges are immense, as the potential for damaging priceless artifacts or even encountering hazardous materials like mercury is very real. But the ethical questions run even deeper. This site is a profound symbol of a cultural philosophy where an emperor prepared to rule in the afterlife as he did in life. To open it is to confront a fundamental choice between our modern thirst for knowledge and a respectful preservation of ancient belief. The sealed tomb of the first emperor stands as the ultimate template, a monumental secret that asks what price we are willing to pay to look upon the face of history. While an emperor built his sealed kingdom below ground, another institution amassed its own fortress of knowledge above it. The Vatican's secret archives represent a different kind of forbidden site, one not lost to time but deliberately guarded by policy and tradition. This is not a single hidden chamber but a labyrinth spanning over 50 miles of shelving, a repository holding documents that have fundamentally shaped the course of Western civilization. For centuries, its contents were accessible only to a privileged few within the church, creating an aura of profound mystery. The word secret here is a translation of the Latin secretum, meaning private or personal, referring to the Pope's own archive. Yet that linguistic nuance did little to dampen the global imagination, which pictured vaults filled with suppressed gospels, evidence of extraterrestrial contact, or proofs of world-altering conspiracies. The reality, as explained by archivists like Bishop Sergio Pagano, is both more mundane and infinitely more significant. This archive is the administrative and diplomatic memory of the papacy, containing papal correspondence, state treaties, trial records, and financial ledgers stretching back over 1,000 years. It houses the Dictatus Papae, a radical 11th century document asserting papal authority over emperors, and the original letters from King Henry VIII of England pleading for an annulment, a request whose denial would alter the religious landscape of a nation. The trial proceedings of Galileo Galilei are here, a poignant record of the clash between emerging science and established doctrine. The sealing of these archives was the ultimate form of information control, a way to preserve the Church's narrative, protect diplomatic secrets, and maintain an aura of doctrinal infallibility. Their gradual opening to qualified scholars in the 19th and 20th centuries marked a seismic shift, reflecting a new, albeit cautious, relationship between powerful institutions and historical transparency. It acknowledges that history is not a fixed monument but a living conversation, one that requires evidence to be part of the dialogue. The archives teach us that sometimes the most powerful seal is not one of stone and poison, but of ink, parchment, and permission. From this controlled release of papal power, we journey to a site where access was governed by an entirely different authority, one not of man, but of nature itself. The Vatican's archives held history under lock and key, but our next site seals away the very possibility of a future. Carved into the permafrost of a remote Arctic island, the entrance to the Svalbard Global Seed Vault is a stark, geometric wedge of concrete and steel emerging from a mountain of snow and rock. It looks less like a library and more like a futuristic fortress, which is precisely its purpose. Opened in 2008, this so-called Doomsday Vault is a profound and modern response to an ancient fear, the loss of our agricultural foundation. Deep within the mountain, maintained at a constant frigid temperature by the natural permafrost, lie duplicate seed samples from gene banks all over the world, from rare varieties of wheat and rice to regional strains of beans and barley. This is not a collection for study, but a backup, a global insurance policy written in the genetic code of more than 1 million seed samples. Officials from the Crop Trust, which manages the vault alongside the Norwegian government, are clear. Its doors are sealed to all but the most essential deposits, and on even rarer occasions withdrawals. The integrity of the vault depends on its isolation. Its remote location on the Svalbard archipelago, far from political borders and major conflicts, along with its strictly limited access, is a deliberate design to protect this treasure from human interference, climate instability, or any large-scale catastrophe. This was not a theoretical safeguard. In 2015, researchers from the International Center for Agricultural Research in the Dry Areas, which had relocated from Aleppo, Syria, due to the conflict there, made the vault's first ever withdrawal. They needed to retrieve duplicate seeds of drought-resistant crops to rebuild their collection and continue their vital work. That single event transformed the vault from a symbolic project into a proven, functioning lifeline. It represents a forward-looking form of sealing, one not meant to conceal a secret past but to preserve an open future. It forces us to consider a unique ethical question. What responsibility do we have to generations we will never meet? By creating this frozen ark, we are making a statement that our current civilizations, with all their flaws and instabilities, have a duty to safeguard the biological heritage that will feed humanity long after our cities and politics have transformed. This modern sanctuary of life's building blocks makes us wonder about ancient sanctuaries built to protect something equally vital, the written word and the soul of a culture. High above the city, within the towering spire of Moscow State University, knowledge itself was held captive. This was not a dark, forgotten catacomb, but a bright, imposing monument to education that concealed a deeper layer of controlled information. Its vast library, one of the largest in Russia, housed a special collections department that functioned as a fortress of ideas. For decades, particularly during the Cold War, entire wings of this intellectual treasury were sealed away, accessible only to a handful of vetted academics and state officials. The rumors swirled around what these restricted stacks actually contained: rare manuscripts on esoteric philosophies, early chronicles of Slavic history that predated official narratives, and artifacts whose origins in the turbulent 20th century were best left unexamined. This was a deliberate policy of intellectual sovereignty. In an era of intense ideological rivalry, controlling the past was a primary tool for shaping the present. Certain historical documents or artistic works, if widely studied, could challenge the dominant narrative or reveal uncomfortable complexities. By sealing them, the state could present a streamlined, unified version of history, protecting not just secrets, but an entire worldview from scrutiny. The collections also served as a paradoxical sanctuary. By restricting access, authorities could also argue they were preserving fragile, irreplaceable items from potential damage or ideologically motivated destruction, keeping them safe in a kind of academic deep freeze. The thaw began tentatively after 1991, as archives slowly started to open. Scholars from around the world gained glimpses into these once forbidden holdings, discovering unique medieval chronicles that offered new perspectives on Eurasian trade routes or artistic works thought lost during periods of conflict. Each revealed document acts as a corrective lens, adding depth and contradiction to our understanding of a monumental century. The story of this library challenges a simple notion that sealing is always about hiding a dark truth. Sometimes it is about actively constructing a single truth by deciding which chapters of the story are allowed to be read. This manipulation of narrative through controlled access makes the raw, uncontrollable power of our next site all the more startling, for it was sealed not by human hands but by the planet itself in a moment of devastating fury. The intellectual locks of a library could not contain the raw, physical force that sealed our next site. In the year 79 of the Common Era, the bustling Roman city of Pompeii did not simply vanish, it was captured. Mount Vesuvius erupted with a violence that defies easy description, sending a superheated wave of gas, ash, and rock, known as a pyroclastic flow, surging down its slopes. This dense, searing cloud moved faster than anyone could flee, engulfing the city and its surrounding villas in moments. It was not a gentle burial, but an instantaneous entombment under many feet of volcanic material that hardened like concrete, sealing everything beneath in a state of suspended animation. For centuries, this catastrophic event functioned as a tragic but perfect preservative, creating a time capsule of unparalleled clarity. While entire neighborhoods were buried, it was the grand, opulent villas on the city's outskirts, like the famed Villa of the Mysteries, that became especially significant sealed chambers. Their thick walls and remote locations meant they were filled completely and uniformly, protecting their contents from the elements and, crucially, from looters for nearly 2,000 years. When systematic excavation began in earnest in the 18th century, archaeologists did not just find ruins, they opened a door directly into a single day in the life of the Roman Empire. The volcanic seal preserved vibrant frescoes with colors so bright they seemed freshly painted, intricate mosaics undisturbed on the floors, and everyday household items, from carbonized loaves of bread to delicate glassware, left exactly as they were when the inhabitants fled or were overcome. Perhaps the most haunting and informative discoveries were the voids found in the hardened ash. Pioneering archaeologists realized these hollow spaces were the precise shapes of the victims, created as their bodies decomposed within the solid cast. By carefully injecting plaster into these voids, they created casts that captured the final postures and even the expressions of individuals in their last moments, a stark and deeply personal record of the disaster. Modern researchers like forensic anthropologist Estelle Laser have studied these casts and other remains using contemporary techniques, not to sensationalize but to understand. By analyzing the bones, they can learn about the general health, diet, and even the genetic origins of Pompeii's population, building a demographic picture of an ancient Roman city. They can study the positioning of remains to map the flow of the pyroclastic surge and understand the timeline of the eruption's phases. This transforms a site of immense tragedy into a source of profound historical insight. The ongoing excavations, such as those in a newly uncovered area known as Regio 5, continue to reveal fresh wonders, proving that this sealed city still has stories to tell. This presents archaeologists with a unique and solemn responsibility. How does one respectfully unseal a moment of extreme trauma while honoring the humanity of those lost and preserving the fragile beauty they left behind? Every brushstroke that clears away ash is a balance between scientific curiosity and ethical stewardship, a reminder that some doors once opened reveal a silence that demands our utmost respect. This accidental, natural preservation stands in stark contrast to sites that were sealed not by disaster, but by deliberate, sacred intention. The silent guardians of the terracotta army were not the only companions the first emperor took into the afterlife. Scattered in the landscape around that central, unopened mound are a series of smaller, quieter tombs, subsidiary pits that archaeologists believe hold the remains of the emperor's consorts and concubines. These sites stand in the long shadow of the main mausoleum, deliberately left undisturbed by modern hands. This is not due to a lack of curiosity, but because of a growing consensus around profound ethical caution and cultural respect. Historical records from the era suggest the tragic possibility that individuals were interred with the ruler, a practice intended to provide companionship and service in the next world. This presents a stark dilemma for contemporary researchers. To excavate these pits is to potentially expose the final resting places of people who may have been victims of a profound historical power structure, reducing their story to mere archaeological data. Yet, to leave them entirely sealed is to forever silence the personal histories of those who lived within the imperial court, individuals whose lives and identities are absent from the grand historical narratives. Scholars now grapple with this balance, debating the use of non-invasive technologies like ground-penetrating radar to map the subsurface structures without physical intrusion. This allows them to gather data on the size, layout, and possible contents of the tombs, constructing a digital model of what lies below while leaving the site itself physically untouched. It is a way of listening at the door without turning the handle. The sealing of these tombs is thus a dual act, an ancient funerary practice of immense cultural significance, meeting a modern ethical principle of restraint. They remain locked away not by poison or trap, but by a collective decision to prioritize reverence over revelation, to acknowledge that some stories, especially those of individuals who had little choice in their fate, might carry a weight that demands they remain at rest. This modern ethical sealing compels us to ask a difficult question when we encounter the buried legacy of historical power, whose curiosity should take precedence. From these silent tombs of ancient court life, we journey to a monument of a different kind of power, one sealed not by reverence but by catastrophic economic failure. The ethical boundaries of archaeology feel distant beneath the streets of Paris, where a different kind of sealed world exists by necessity. The city of light is built upon a dark, echoing twin, a labyrinth of tunnels and quarries known as the Catacombs. While tourists walk a small, sanctioned route past neatly stacked skulls and femurs, this is merely the curated exhibit. Beyond the official gates stretch nearly 200 miles of passages, the overwhelming majority of which are strictly sealed and patrolled by the Inspection Générale des Carrières, the city's quarry inspection authority. This is not a single tomb but an entire forbidden subterranean landscape. These closed sections are not empty, they form a chaotic, sprawling archive of Parisian history, layer upon layer. Within them, one can find the bones of prehistoric cave bears from when the area was a wilderness, alongside the meticulously carved relief sculptures and poignant graffiti left by clandestine visitors across centuries, from revolutionaries to romantic poets. There are underground amphitheaters, fully furnished rooms, and even pools, all created in secret by those who slipped past the gates. This makes the off-limits catacombs a unique palimpsest, a physical record of the city's growth from its limestone bones upwards and of the enduring human desire to leave a mark in hidden places. The primary reason for the seal is starkly practical, a matter of public safety. The tunnels are a geological jigsaw puzzle with sections prone to sudden collapse, pockets of dangerous gases, and a disorienting sameness that has led even experienced explorers to become hopelessly lost. The authorities do not just discourage entry, they actively monitor and pursue those who attempt it, as the risks of a rescue operation in such an unstable environment are immense. Yet, this practical sealing has a profound secondary effect. It acts as a preservative. By keeping the vast network closed, the city inadvertently protects this unofficial museum from mass vandalism and degradation, freezing in time the strange, artistic, and historical artifacts left behind by generations of shadow visitors. It raises a compelling question: what does a society choose to hide, even from itself, in order to keep the surface world safe and functioning? The catacombs represent a sealing that is both bureaucratic and existential, guarding not just against physical danger, but against the sheer, overwhelming weight of the past that lies directly beneath our feet. This government-enforced closure of a dangerous historical space leads us to another, where the seal was motivated not by safety, but by the desire to completely erase a regime's most tangible symbol. The Forbidden City's innermost chambers were a world of enforced silence. For 5 centuries, this sprawling complex in the heart of Beijing was not a palace in the way we imagine one today, open for tours and photographs. It was a meticulously designed instrument of power, sealed off from the outside world by imperial decree and the very real threat of severe punishment. Its high vermilion walls and deep moat created a physical and psychological barrier, separating the Son of Heaven and his celestial court from the everyday lives of millions of subjects. Within, a strict hierarchy of space governed every movement. The outer court, with its vast plazas and grand halls like the Hall of Supreme Harmony, was for ceremonial functions where the emperor performed his role as a distant, almost divine ruler. But beyond the gate of heavenly purity lay the true seal, the inner court. This was the private realm, a labyrinth of smaller palaces, gardens, and residential quarters reserved exclusively for the imperial family, his consorts, and the thousands of eunuchs and maidservants who attended them. Historians point to the architecture itself as the primary tool of secrecy. The layout followed a rigid north-south axis, with successive gates and courtyards controlling access and sightlines. A commoner or even a mid-level official could never see into the heart of the complex. The emperor's daily life, his decisions, his family, all were shrouded in mystery, and that mystery was carefully cultivated to reinforce the idea that his authority was not merely political, but cosmic and untouchable. This seclusion served a dual purpose. It was a practical security measure protecting the ruler from potential assassins or plotters, but more profoundly, it was a spiritual safeguard. By walling himself off, the emperor maintained the purity and potency of the mandate of heaven, the belief that his right to rule was divinely ordained. The Forbidden City was, in essence, a temple to absolute power, and its inhabitants were its high priests, performing rituals of governance in sacred isolation. The dramatic unsealing of this space in the 20th century, first as the Palace Museum after the last emperor's abdication, then fully to the public, represents one of history's great reversals. The aura of divine mystery evaporated, replaced by the chatter of tourists and the flash of cameras. The meaning of the space was utterly transformed. It shifted from a symbol of exclusive, unquestionable authority to one of shared national heritage and human artistry. We no longer kneel in the courtyards, we walk through them, studying the intricate carvings on the marble balustrades and peering into rooms once reserved for an empress. This transition asks a powerful question: does opening a forbidden site dilute its original power, or does it transfer that power to the people who now claim it as their own? The answer may lie in the very act of walking where once we could not, reclaiming the narrative of a place that was built to keep us out. From this grand architectural seal of imperial ideology, we move to a site sealed for a far more immediate and tactical reason. The Forbidden City's walls were meant to project power, but in the Nevada desert, secrecy was the entire point. Area 51 is not an ancient ruin, but a modern historical site sealed by policy and paranoia. Its very existence was a state secret for decades, a blank spot on the map that became a canvas for the world's wildest imaginations. Established in the 1950s as a remote testing ground, its initial purpose was starkly practical: to develop and fly aircraft like the high-altitude U-2 spy plane, machines the United States needed to peer over the Iron Curtain without triggering a war. The sealing was absolute, enforced by restricted airspace, guarded perimeter fences, and a government that simply would not acknowledge the base was there. This created a powerful vacuum, and nature, along with human nature, abhors a vacuum. Into that void poured stories of recovered alien spacecraft, reverse-engineered technology, and hidden extraterrestrial beings. The secrecy, born from genuine Cold War necessity, inadvertently authored a new chapter in global folklore. The gradual declassification of documents related to Area 51, particularly in the 21st century, has performed a fascinating historical correction. We now know the truth of projects like Oxcart, which developed the sleek, radar-evading SR-71 Blackbird. The real stories are of human ingenuity operating under immense pressure, of engineers solving problems that seemed insurmountable, and of pilots flying missions at the edge of space. The mythical aura begins to dissipate when confronted with memos about runway lengths and fuel mixtures. Yet, the declassified history reveals something perhaps more profound than any alien myth: the immense psychological power of a simple sealed door. When an authority declares an entire space off limits and refuses to explain why, the public narrative is no longer controlled by that authority. It is surrendered to rumor, fear, and hope. Area 51 teaches us that state secrecy does not just protect information, it actively generates legend. The eventual, partial opening of the record is not merely an act of transparency. It is a reclamation of narrative, shifting the story from what might be hidden to what humans actually achieved in the shadows. This journey from military secret to public knowledge makes us wonder about a different kind of sealed space, one where the motivation was not national security, but spiritual devotion. The sealed chambers of Area 51 were born from a need for tactical advantage, but in Japan, a sacred seal is maintained for spiritual clarity. The Ai's Grand Shrine, or Ai's Jingu, is not a single ancient building frozen in time. It is a living cycle of faith, a tradition of deliberate, rhythmic renewal that has continued for more than 1,300 years. At the heart of this practice is the Shikinen Sengu, a ceremony where the main inner shrines, dedicated to the sun goddess Amaterasu, are meticulously rebuilt every 20 years on adjacent, purified plots of land. The old structure is not merely dismantled, its innermost chamber, the Shodan, is ceremonially sealed. This space is considered so profoundly sacred that access is restricted to the highest-ranking priests of the imperial family, and photography is strictly, universally forbidden. For the public and scholars alike, the interior remains a complete mystery, its contents and precise layout known only through guarded oral tradition passed down through generations of caretakers. This act is far more than architectural maintenance. It is a theological principle made physical. By rebuilding identically using ancient, prescribed techniques with hand tools like the adze, the community actively preserves knowledge that would otherwise be lost to history, from specific wood joinery to thatching methods. More importantly, the ritual transfer of the deity's sacred mirror, the Yota no Kagami, from the old shrine to the new one is a symbolic rebirth. It embodies a core Shinto appreciation for impermanence and purity, acknowledging that spiritual energy, like all things, requires renewal to remain vibrant and uncorrupted. The old site, once sealed, returns to the forest, its materials distributed to other shrines as sacred relics, completing a cycle of life, death, and rebirth. This creates a fascinating paradox. By refusing to preserve a physical building as a permanent monument, the tradition preserves something far more vital: the living process and spiritual intent behind it. A static, thousand-year-old building might show us how people built, but the Shikinen Sengu shows us why they built, and it invites each new generation to participate in that why. It asks us to consider what we truly lose when we focus only on preserving the object, rather than the practice that gives it meaning. How does a culture maintain its identity not by clinging to relics, but by continuously, faithfully reenacting its core beliefs? This spiritual sealing through renewal stands in stark contrast to our next site, where a door was closed not by tradition, but by the forceful end of one world and the uneasy beginning of another. The rhythmic renewal of Ai's Jingu is a seal of faith, but some doors are closed by the sheer weight of what they contain. In the 1920s, British archaeologist Leonard Woolley made a discovery in the sands of southern Iraq that would both dazzle and deeply unsettle the world. Digging into the royal cemetery of the ancient Sumerian city of Ur, his team uncovered a series of deep shaft tombs dating back to around 2600 before the Common Era. These were not simple graves but elaborate subterranean chambers built for kings and queens, known as the Lugals and Nins of one of humanity's first great civilizations. The treasures were breathtaking, intricate gold headdresses, lyres adorned with bulls' heads of lapis lazuli and gold, and the stunning standard of Ur, a mosaic panel depicting scenes of peace and war. Yet the context of these riches told a more complex story. The most famous find, which Woolley named the Great Death Pit, revealed a queen, identified as Puabi by a cylinder seal, lying in state. Surrounding her were the carefully arranged remains of dozens of attendants, from soldiers and musicians to handmaidens, all adorned in fine regalia. This was not evidence of a massacre, but of a highly formalized ritual, a practice scholars refer to as retainer sacrifice, where members of the court voluntarily or by custom accompanied their ruler into the afterlife to continue their service. The discovery provided an unparalleled window into early concepts of divinity, royalty, and the journey beyond death. But Woolley, facing the limitations of his time and the sheer fragility of the site, made a critical decision. He did not excavate every chamber to its conclusion. After documenting and removing the most significant artifacts, he deliberately backfilled and sealed many of the tombs, leaving them for future generations. This act established a powerful precedent. Modern archaeologists in Iraq and around the world, confronting the relentless threat of looting and the irreversible damage caused by exposure, have continued this practice. They now use advanced scanning technology to map sealed tombs in detail, creating digital models, and then they rebury them. The goal is to protect the site from both human greed and environmental decay, preserving the integrity of the context until conservation science advances enough to safely extract every particle of information. This represents a profound philosophical shift in archaeology, from treasure hunting and extraction to a mindset of stewardship and patience. It acknowledges that our current tools are still crude, and that our responsibility extends not just to the past, but to the future researchers who will follow us. When we choose to reseal a tomb, we sacrifice the immediate thrill of discovery. We walk away from unknown artifacts and unresolved questions, but what we gain is the promise of a more complete understanding later, one that treats the site not as a resource to be consumed, but as a fragile, non-renewable record to be protected. It is an admission that sometimes the most ethical way to honor history is to walk away and let it sleep a while longer, guarded by the very earth that has kept its secrets for millennia. This patient, deliberate sealing of ancient royal resting places makes the aggressive, politically charged sealing of an entire modern city all the more jarring. The patient stewardship of an ancient tomb stands in stark contrast to a seal enforced by the relentless sea itself. Off the northern coast of Cyprus, the Mediterranean holds a secret that was not lost but deliberately returned to the deep. In the late 1960s, a local diver named Andreas Kariolu stumbled upon a peculiar shape on the seabed, a mound that turned out to be the remarkably intact hull of a Greek merchant vessel from the 4th century before the Common Era. This was the Kyrenia ship, a wooden time capsule that had rested on the sandy bottom for over 2,300 years, preserved by a protective layer of sediment. The subsequent excavation was a landmark in marine archaeology, a meticulous, decade-long process that recovered not just the ship's structure, but its entire story. Thousands of amphorae, still containing the remnants of almonds and wine, painted a vivid picture of ancient trade routes. Millstones for grinding grain, cooking pots, and even the crew's personal items, like wooden spoons and bronze coins, spoke of daily life aboard a working vessel. The ship's hull, painstakingly raised, reassembled, and now displayed in a museum in Kyrenia Castle, provides a blueprint for classical shipbuilding that no historical text could ever match. Yet, after this incredible recovery, a critical decision was made. The exact coordinates of the wreck site on the seabed were officially protected and sealed off from public diving. This was not an act of hiding history, but of preserving its context. While the main hull was removed, the surrounding seabed almost certainly holds scattered artifacts, environmental data, and the precise imprint of the wreck's final resting place, clues that are fragile and easily disturbed. The seal is a conservation barrier against souvenir hunters, anchor drops, and even well-meaning amateur archaeologists whose fins could irrevocably scatter priceless context. Marine archaeologists champion this approach, viewing such protected zones as underwater museums where history remains in its original setting. The challenges of marine preservation are unique and immense. Saltwater, marine organisms, and shifting currents constantly threaten to degrade organic materials once they are exposed. A site like Kyrenia can only be studied in short, expensive campaigns requiring specialized teams and equipment. By sealing the site, authorities effectively hit pause, preserving the remaining data for future scientists with more advanced, less intrusive technologies. This raises a compelling question about our relationship with submerged history. On land, we can build a protective structure over a site, but the ocean cannot be so easily controlled. Sealing an underwater site is an act of profound humility, an admission that the sea is both the perfect preservative and the ultimate authority. We are borrowing these secrets from the deep, and sometimes the most responsible thing to do is to give them back, trusting that the quiet dark of the seabed is the safest museum of all. From this sunken merchant vessel guarded by the sea, our journey climbs to a mountain fortress sealed by conquest and legend. High in the thin, punishing air of the Indian Himalayas, a glacial lake holds a mystery written in bone. Rup Kund Lake, often called Skeleton Lake, rests at an altitude of over 16,000 feet, a place of stark beauty and extreme isolation. For much of the year, it is frozen solid and inaccessible, locked away by ice and sheer vertical cliffs. When the summer melt briefly reveals its shores, the lake bed yields a haunting sight, the scattered skeletal remains of hundreds of individuals. For centuries, this site was known only through local folklore, a whispered story of a king, a queen, and their entourage who angered the mountain goddess and were struck down by her fury. The site's remote and treacherous location, coupled with its sacred status to nearby communities who view the area as the abode of deities, created a powerful natural and cultural seal. It was a place one did not casually visit, effectively forbidden by geography and reverence. Modern scientific curiosity eventually reached this high-altitude crypt, but the revelations only deepened the mystery. Early theories proposed a single catastrophic event, perhaps an avalanche or a sudden, violent storm that wiped out a large traveling group all at once. However, recent advances in genetic analysis have completely rewritten this story. Researchers conducting careful studies discovered the individuals did not all die in one moment or even in one century. The genetic evidence points to multiple distinct events spanning 1,000 years, with groups originating from vastly different parts of the world. Some of the remains are linked to people from South Asia, dating to around the year 800 of the Common Era. Astonishingly, others show genetic ancestry far to the west from the eastern Mediterranean region and appear to have perished much later, perhaps in the 19th century. This genetic tapestry suggests Rupkund was not the site of one tragedy, but a recurring and deadly landmark on a high mountain pass. The leading hypothesis for at least one of these events is as startling as it is specific: a sudden, massive hailstorm. Forensic analysis of some skulls shows short, deep fractures consistent with impact from large, rounded objects, like cricket ball-sized hailstones, a phenomenon not uncommon in the volatile Himalayan climate. Imagine being caught on an exposed mountainside with no shelter as the sky literally turns to stone. This scientific narrative now intertwines with the ancient local legend of divine retribution, each giving a different language to the same brutal natural force. The site's status as a forbidden zone is thus maintained by a delicate balance. Its extreme inaccessibility acts as a physical lock, while its sacred significance to local communities imposes a powerful ethical one. Official research permits are exceptionally difficult to obtain, and out of respect, most of the remains have been left in situ, scattered where they fell. To remove them would be to dismantle a sacred memorial and destroy the forensic context. This creates a profound dilemma for science and for heritage. What is the responsibility of researchers when the subject of study is both a crucial scientific puzzle and an integral, respected part of a living community's spiritual landscape? The investigation must proceed with a humility that matches the altitude, prioritizing non-invasive techniques and continuous dialogue with local guardians. Rupkund Lake stands as a solemn reminder that some secrets are protected not by walls or laws, but by wind, ice, and the quiet weight of tradition. It challenges us to see a field of bones not merely as a data set, but as a lasting place of memory, where the line between archaeological site and sacred ground is as thin as the Himalayan air. This intersection of reverence and mystery finds a stark parallel in a city that was sealed not by tradition, but by the abrupt and total victory of one worldview over another. A city can be severed by more than just a river or a park. For 28 years, a brutal scar known as the Death Strip ran through the very neighborhoods of Berlin, a forbidden zone sealed not by tradition or disaster, but by a political idea made terrifyingly real. This was not a single wall, but a complex system of barriers, a wide no-man's land of raked sand to show footprints, watchtowers with sweeping searchlights, anti-vehicle trenches, and inner and outer concrete walls topped with rounded pipes to make them impossible to grip. Its sole purpose was to prevent citizens of East Berlin from crossing into the west, transforming familiar city streets into an impassable, deadly maze. The sealing of this urban space was an act of profound social control, rendering neighbors, families, and entire communities permanently divided by a few meters of fortified emptiness. The human stories embedded in this forbidden strip are its true historical record. There were the desperate, ingenious escape attempts, like the two families who built a hot air balloon from scrap fabric, soaring over the barriers under cover of night. There were the tragic tales of those who did not make it, individuals whose final moments were marked in the sand. And there were also the guards in the towers, ordinary people given an extraordinary and grim duty, ordered to enforce a boundary that cut through the heart of their own city. The fall of the wall in 1989 was not a slow archaeological unsealing, but a sudden, jubilant eruption. The Forbidden Strip was instantly reclaimed by the people it had divided, becoming a site of celebration, then of rapid redevelopment as the city sought to stitch itself back together. This urgent erasure makes the preserved fragments all the more vital. At the Berlin Wall Memorial on Bernauer Strasse, a section of the Death Strip has been maintained exactly as it was, complete with a surviving watchtower and a haunting stretch of the original inner wall. To stand there today is to experience a profound dissonance, seeing this grim apparatus of control framed against a backdrop of a vibrant, reunited city. It forces a difficult but necessary confrontation. How does a society remember a wound that it actively chose to heal by building over it? The preservation of these fragments answers that preservation is not about freezing pain, but about providing an anchor for memory in a landscape that has moved on. It creates a physical space where the abstract concept of division becomes tangible, where visitors can grasp the sheer scale of the barrier and comprehend the reality of life in its shadow. This careful curation helps a society reconcile by refusing to let the convenience of forgetting overtake the hard work of understanding. It transforms a site of oppression into a place of education, ensuring that the stories of both courage and control are not lost to the new buildings and busy streets. The memorial asks us to consider what we build in the spaces where walls once stood, and whether true unity requires us to sometimes leave a crack in the pavement, a deliberate reminder of the break that once was. From this stark political barrier erected by human hands, we now venture into a seal crafted by the patient, relentless work of nature itself. A sealed world can be found not in a desert or on a mountain, but under the quiet Romanian countryside. In 1986, workers surveying the land for a potential power plant site drilled a narrow shaft and broke through into a darkness untouched for an estimated 5.5 million years. They had discovered Movile Cave, a labyrinth of chambers and lakes sealed off from the surface by an impenetrable layer of clay and limestone. This was not an empty cavern. It was a fully functional, self-contained world that had evolved in utter isolation, a biological time capsule of staggering significance. When scientists first descended through that narrow entrance, they entered an environment alien to our own. The air was thick with carbon dioxide and laced with hydrogen sulfide, a gas toxic to most surface life. There was not a single photon of light. The very foundation of this ecosystem was not the sun, but chemistry. On the walls and in the waters, thin, pale microbial mats thrived, performing a process called chemosynthesis. These bacteria use the chemical energy from hydrogen sulfide, much like plants use sunlight to create organic matter. This microbial film forms the base of an entire food web, supporting a menagerie of creatures found nowhere else on the planet. 48 species have been identified so far, and 33 are endemic, meaning they exist only within this one cave. They are pale, blind, and often strangely elongated, having lost the traits unnecessary for a life of perpetual dark, a water scorpion, a colorless spider, and predatory leeches adapted to the still, soupy waters. The sealing of Movile was a geological accident, a slow process that trapped a pocket of the ancient environment and its inhabitants. Today, however, its isolation is fiercely guarded by human hands. To protect this fragile, pristine laboratory, access is granted to only a handful of researchers each year under strict protocols. They must decontaminate their gear, limit their time inside, and ensure no outside organisms or modern air compromises the cave's unique atmosphere. This deliberate, modern seal is an act of scientific reverence. Movile Cave offers a direct glimpse into an alternative evolutionary pathway, showing us how life can adapt and diversify when cut off from the rest of the biosphere. It proves that the rules for survival can be rewritten when the fundamental energy source changes. For astrobiologists, this makes Movile a crucial analog for considering life beyond Earth, on moons like Europa or Enceladus, where sunlight cannot reach but chemical energy might flow in subsurface oceans. This cave asks a profound question: is life on Earth the rule, or is it simply one possible expression of a much more universal principle? By preserving this sealed, sunless world, we preserve a key to understanding life's incredible tenacity and its potential to flourish in the most unexpected corners of the universe. This living relic of an ancient, independent world stands in sharp contrast to a monument sealed not by chance, but by a king's explicit command to forget. Behind the gilded public halls of Versailles, a door marked the boundary of a world within a world. The Queen's bedchamber, part of Marie Antoinette's private suite, was a sanctum sealed by protocol long before it was sealed by history. In a palace where the king's waking and sleeping were public ceremonies, these rooms were a rare concession to intimacy, a place where the Queen could momentarily shed the immense weight of her crown. Yet even here, privacy was a relative term, observed by a select group of ladies in waiting and subject to the relentless gossip of the court. The chamber itself was a masterpiece of delicate luxury, hung with silk embroidered with floral patterns, furnished with exquisite pieces by master craftsmen like Resealed, and filled with personal treasures from porcelain to portraits of her children. It was a stage for both personal life and political theater, where alliances were whispered and the Queen's famed taste set fashions that would later be used against her. When the revolution swept through the palace, this intimate space was violently unsealed. The furnishings were seized, the symbols of royalty stripped away, and the room itself was repurposed, its identity erased. The physical sealing that followed the monarchy's fall was a final, definitive act. It transformed a living space into a historical artifact, freezing a moment of supreme privilege that had already vanished. Historians today, working from surviving inventories, architectural plans, and the sometimes spiteful memoirs of courtiers, perform a kind of forensic restoration. They piece together the layout of the rooms, the placement of a vanity, the color of the draperies, not merely to catalogue objects, but to understand the human experience within those walls. This was where Marie Antoinette sought respite from the exhausting performance of royalty, a performance that ultimately failed to protect her. The story of this chamber illuminates a profound tension at the heart of absolute power. The monarch was a public institution, a living symbol, yet also a private individual. The bedchamber represents the impossible desire for a self apart from the crown, a desire that, in the end, the public would not permit. Its sealing after the revolution was a symbolic reclaiming of that privacy by the nation itself, declaring that such privileged seclusion was a luxury the new France would not afford its rulers. It asks us what we truly see when we look upon a restored historical room. Are we witnessing a personal home, or merely the carefully arranged set for a public drama that ended in tragedy? From this intimate chamber of a fallen queen, our path leads into a far older and darker story of confinement, one not built for refuge but for containment. The legend of the Minotaur is a story of confinement at the heart of a maze. On the island of Crete, the sprawling ruins of the Palace of Knossos are the physical anchor for this ancient tale, a site sealed not by a single door, but by the collapse of an entire civilization and the slow accumulation of myth. For the ancient Greeks, Knossos was already a place of deep antiquity, a remnant of the powerful Minoan culture that had faded into memory centuries before. It was upon this mysterious ruin that they projected one of their most enduring stories of King Minos, the brilliant craftsman Daedalus, and the monstrous half-man, half-bull imprisoned in an inescapable labyrinth. This created a dual seal, one of crumbling stone and earth, and another of powerful narrative, where the site became synonymous with a legendary, forbidden space. The early 20th century excavations by Sir Arthur Evans sought to break both seals at once. His ambitious and now controversial reconstructions using concrete to recreate columns, frescoes, and grand staircases were an attempt to make the myth physically walkable. He painted a vivid picture of a sophisticated, peaceful society, which he called Minoan, directly linking the complex layout of the multi-storied palace with the idea of the labyrinth itself. For many visitors, walking through the restored portions of Knossos feels like stepping into the legend, the very corridors where Theseus may have wandered with his ball of thread. Yet modern archaeologists view Evans's work with caution, noting that his reconstructions are often more reflective of early 20th century artistic interpretation than strict Bronze Age reality. He effectively built a new layer over the ruins, a kind of modern myth made of reinforced concrete. This presents a fascinating dilemma. Does this reconstruction help us understand the past, or does it create a new, seductive fiction that further seals the authentic site beneath it? The power of Knossos lies precisely in this entanglement. No archaeologist has discovered a sealed chamber labeled as the Minotaur's lair, but the entire complex functions as a historical labyrinth where the twisting paths of evidence and story are impossible to separate. The myth of the inescapable maze taps into a profound, universal anxiety, the fear of being lost, of facing an unspeakable inner terror with no clear way out. This psychological resonance is why the site remains sealed in our collective imagination, perhaps more powerfully than any physical vault. It challenges us to ask what we are truly searching for when we explore such places. Are we seeking the historical Minotaur, or are we confronting the labyrinthine nature of history itself, where every answer seems to lead to two new questions? The legend endures not because it hides a factual truth, but because it reveals a human one, our endless fascination with the monsters and mazes we build, both in stone and in story. From this ancient puzzle of myth and mortar, we turn to a very real and meticulously organized modern archive, where the secrets are not of monsters but of movies. A soft drink recipe is not something you would expect to find alongside royal tombs and state secrets. Yet in Atlanta, the formula for Coca-Cola rests inside a vault with security rivaling that of a central bank, a modern forbidden chamber sealed by corporate decree. This is not a historical artifact discovered by accident, but a secret actively maintained since the late 19th century, a masterclass in transforming a simple list of ingredients into a legendary object of global desire. The recipe's original protection was born from fierce competition in the patent medicine era, a practical necessity to guard the unique blend of oils, extracts, and flavorings that made the drink distinct. Over decades, that practical need evolved into a core element of the brand's very soul. The vault, now housed within the World of Coca-Cola Museum, is a brilliant piece of theater. Visitors can gaze upon its imposing metal door, hear about its biometric locks and limited access protocols, and feel the aura of profound secrecy, all while knowing the contents will never be revealed. This performance is the point. The sealing is not to prevent loss, but to manufacture mystique. By declaring the formula the world's most closely guarded secret, the company elevates a consumer product into the realm of myth, suggesting there is something almost alchemical, something too precious for the ordinary world at its heart. This modern act of sealing creates a paradox of incredible commercial power. The recipe is simultaneously everywhere and nowhere. Billions of servings are consumed globally every year, yet the exact formula remains locked away, its absence generating more narrative and brand loyalty than its presence ever could. It asks a compelling question about our modern world. Where do we place our sense of wonder when so much knowledge is at our fingertips? We seem to crave new mysteries, and corporations have learned to build them, creating sealed vaults of intellectual property where once there were sealed tombs of kings. The value is no longer just in the tangible product, but in the intangible story of its forbidden essence. This carefully crafted commercial secret stands in stark contrast to our next site, where the seal was not orchestrated by a boardroom, but imposed by a sudden and overwhelming force of nature. The formula for Coca-Cola is sealed to create a legend, but the earth itself can break open with a far more dangerous reality. In Centralia, Pennsylvania, the ground became a slow, silent furnace. It began in 1962, a routine cleanup of a landfill that ignited an exposed coal seam. What was meant to be a controlled burn instead tapped into the labyrinth of abandoned mines beneath the town, a network of old tunnels that became veins of fire feeding a subterranean inferno. This was not a dramatic explosion, but a creeping, inexorable disaster. For years, residents lived with the growing signs, the sulfurous smell, the dead vegetation, and the faint plumes of smoke rising from cracks in backyards and roads. The true danger was invisible, a build-up of toxic gases like carbon monoxide and the constant threat of the ground giving way into the burning cavities below. The response was a gradual, painful sealing. Over decades, the state and federal government bought out homes and relocated families until the entire borough was officially condemned. Today, Centralia is an exclusion zone, a modern ghost town sealed not by walls but by warning signs, chain-link fences, and the ever-present risk of asphyxiation or collapse. The few remaining streets are fractured and overgrown, with steam and smoke still curling from the earth in a haunting reminder of the fire below, a fire that experts estimate could burn for another 250 years. This accidental seal has created a profound historical paradox. By declaring the area forbidden for human habitation, authorities have inadvertently preserved it. The vacant lots where houses once stood, the cracked pavement of Route 61 now closed and graffiti covered, the lonely foundations being reclaimed by forest, they all capture a very specific moment in time, a snapshot of a mid-century American small town frozen in a state of arrested decay. It is a monument not to ancient kings but to modern industry, municipal oversight, and the unintended consequences of our relationship with the land. The site has become a macabre tourist destination, drawing visitors who walk the empty grid, drawn by the eerie atmosphere and the sobering lesson it represents. Centralia forces us to confront a difficult legacy. How do we manage the ruins of our own industrial age? The fire was a failure of policy and geology, but the sealed town that resulted tells a deeper story of community displacement, environmental endurance, and the strange beauty of abandonment. It asks what we learn from places we must leave behind, and how a site of danger and loss can become, against all odds, a place of quiet reflection on the fragility of the worlds we build. From this town sealed by its own burning foundations, we journey to a final site where the seal is an act of profound and timeless devotion. Deep beneath the jungle floor, water held the final secret. In the limestone heart of the Yucatan Peninsula, the ancient Maya saw gateways. These were cenotes, natural sinkholes where the roof of an underground river had collapsed, revealing pools of startlingly clear water that plunged into absolute darkness. For the Maya, these were not just sources of water, they were sacred portals to Svalbard, the underworld, a realm of both danger and divine power. Certain cenotes, especially the great sacred cenote at the city of Chichen Itza, were considered so profoundly connected to the gods that they became effectively sealed by tradition, revered and feared in equal measure. For centuries, local communities knew of their locations but maintained a respectful distance, understanding them as forbidden spaces where one did not simply swim or draw water. They were thresholds, and to cross them without purpose was to invite the attention of the lords of the underworld. This cultural seal, woven from spiritual belief, kept these watery chambers pristine until modern times. When archaeologists, working with special permits and in collaboration with local guides, finally entered these submerged caves, they found not empty darkness, but a time capsule preserved with perfect clarity by the mineral-rich waters. Using advanced diving technology, they mapped labyrinthine tunnels and chambers, their lights illuminating artifacts resting on the silt floor exactly where they had been placed centuries before. They discovered delicate offerings of jade beads, intricately worked gold discs depicting deities, and pottery vessels once containing food and incense. They also encountered more solemn remains, the skeletons of individuals, often young men and women, who had been offered to the gods. Researchers approach these finds with immense care, interpreting them not as evidence of a single dark act, but as a complex religious practice deeply tied to the Maya worldview. In a landscape without rivers, where rain was life itself, the cenotes were the veins of the earth. During periods of severe drought, the need to appease the rain god Chok would have been desperate. The act of offering precious objects and, in extreme times, human life, was a profound transaction, an attempt to communicate with and nourish the powers that controlled the very survival of the community. The items and individuals chosen were of high value, indicating the offering's significance. These underwater sites tell a story of a culture that saw the natural world as fully alive and responsive, where a sinkhole was not a geological feature but a mouth that could speak to the gods. The modern exploration of these cenotes is a delicate dance between science and spirit. Each artifact recovered is studied to understand trade networks, artistic styles, and ritual practices, but their removal is done with the understanding that it also disconnects them from the sacred context that gave them meaning. The cenotes themselves, even after being studied, often regain their sealed status, their waters closing over the secrets that remain. They challenge us to expand our definition of a historical site. A tomb is built, a vault is constructed, but a cenote is discovered, a natural formation that a culture chose to consecrate. It reveals how ancient peoples mapped their beliefs directly onto the geography around them, transforming landscape into theology. The water that preserved these offerings for 1,000 years now asks us a final question. As we conclude our journey through 20 sealed sites, what compels us to open the doors that time and tradition have closed? From an emperor's poisoned tomb to these sacred sinkholes, a single thread connects all 20 forbidden places. It is the human drive to create boundaries between the known and the unknown, the sacred and the profane, the living and the dead. Each seal, whether made of stone, policy, fear, or faith, served a purpose. Some protected power, others preserved memory, and many guarded a truth too potent or too fragile for the world above. Our relentless curiosity to break these seals tells an equally important story. It speaks of our need to reconnect with lost chapters, to challenge official narratives, and to seek understanding even in the face of danger or taboo. This tension between the urge to conceal and the compulsion to reveal is the very engine of history. It reminds us that the past is never truly a settled fact, but a conversation held in whispers behind locked doors. Every time we choose to open one or to leave one sealed, we are participating in that conversation, deciding what stories are worth the risk of being told, and what mysteries deserve to keep their silent vigil a little while longer. This universal pattern of sealing and unsealing reveals something deeper about ourselves. It is not merely about doors in the earth or locks on archives, but about the very architecture of human understanding. To declare a space forbidden is to draw a powerful line, one that says, this knowledge, this place, this truth is not for everyone. That act of restriction instantly transforms what lies beyond the boundary. An ordinary cave becomes a gateway to another world. A simple formula becomes a priceless treasure. A city street becomes an ideological battlefield. The seal itself, whether made of stone, law, or legend, imbues the site with a gravity it might never have possessed on its own. We see this evolution clearly across time. Ancient rulers sealed their tombs with threats of curses and rivers of poison, a spiritual and psychological defense meant to protect their eternal rest. Medieval institutions like the Vatican sealed archives to control the narrative of faith and power. In the modern era, the reasons shift toward a different kind of protection. We seal the Svalbard seed vault to safeguard a biological future, or we choose not to excavate certain tombs out of ethical respect for those interred. This progression mirrors our changing values, moving from a focus on individual or institutional power toward broader concepts of collective heritage, safety, and even reverence for the past itself. But the crucial moment always comes when the seal is broken. That act is never a simple administrative task. It is a transfer of authority. When the Berlin Wall fell, the power to define the city's space shifted instantly from the state to the people. When the Vatican archives opened to scholars, the Church's singular control over its own history was shared with the world. Each unsealing challenges an old story and demands a new one be written, often sparking fierce debate. Was the excavation of Pompeii a respectful recovery or a violation of a mass resting place? Is displaying artifacts from a sacred cenote a service to education or a disconnect from their spiritual meaning? These are not easy questions, and they highlight the conflict inherent in revelation. We gain knowledge, but we may lose mystery. We gain understanding, but we may disrupt a long-held peace. This eternal tension between the human desire to know and the equally human need to set things apart is what truly forges history. It is the engine behind every archaeological dig, every declassified document, every whispered legend that compels us to look deeper. The 20 sites we have explored are not just locations, they are chapters in this much longer story about our relationship with the unknown. They remind us that history is not a static collection of facts waiting in the dark, but a living, breathing conversation between what has been hidden and our enduring need to bring it into the light. These sealed spaces, from an emperor's tomb to a corporate vault, are not just containers of secrets, they are monuments to human intention. Each barrier we have encountered, whether built from fear, faith, or a desire for control, tells us what a society valued enough to hide away. The poisonous rivers guarding a ruler's afterlife speak of a power so absolute it sought to defy death itself. The locked archives of a religious institution reveal a narrative carefully curated across centuries. Even the modern seed vault, sealed for our collective future, is a profound statement of hope mixed with sobering foresight. What unites them all is the undeniable truth that the seal itself is a historical artifact, a silent declaration of what mattered most in the moment it was closed. The modern era has witnessed a powerful shift toward unsealing, driven by a growing belief in transparency and the democratization of knowledge. Archives have opened their doors to scholars, satellite imagery has mapped lost cities, and non-invasive radar has peered into unexcavated tombs. This movement reflects a world increasingly uncomfortable with the idea that history belongs only to the powerful or the privileged. Yet, this very access forces us to confront difficult new questions. Does our right to know outweigh the cultural or spiritual sanctity of a site? Is digitally reconstructing a sacred chamber an act of preservation, or a new form of intrusion? The ethical landscape is as complex as any labyrinth we have explored. Technology now offers a middle path, allowing us to learn without necessarily disturbing. Ground-penetrating radar, LiDAR scans from aircraft, and advanced spectral imaging let us listen to the past without breaking its silence. These tools are reshaping the very idea of what it means to be forbidden. A site can remain physically sealed, its rest undisturbed, while yielding its broader secrets to the careful, respectful gaze of science. This delicate balance may define the next chapter of historical discovery, where reverence and curiosity are not opposites but partners. The allure of the secret, however, will never fully fade. It is woven into our nature. These 20 places remind us that history is not a passive record, but an active conversation between what is revealed and what is held back. Every sealed door invites a question, and every opened one demands a story. Your own corner of the world holds echoes of this same dynamic. Perhaps there is a forgotten building in your town, a local legend about a sealed tunnel, or a family story that feels like a hidden chapter. History's locked doors are everywhere, waiting for a curious mind to ask the first question. We would love to hear which of these mysterious places captivated you most, or if you know of a forbidden site in your own region. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you want to join us for more journeys into the shadows of the past, be sure to subscribe. Remember, the greatest stories are often those whispered just beyond the light, waiting for the right moment to be heard.